afternoon to you, and thank you so much for finding time to be with us today. The show is Diaspora Dispatches, where we get to look at the latest news and stories from across the continent of Africa. And unlike the previous conversations that we've heard, I'd like for us today to look at a topic of discussion. There's a story that we have been following for you from Ethiopia about the talks that were supposed to be happening in Tanzania, which did happen. And from the reports that we are receiving is that there was no deal from the talks between Ethiopian government and the OLA, that is the Oromo Liberation Army. So that will form the basis of our conversation this afternoon, and perhaps take us a bit down memory lane to even why and how this OLA was formed and what it has been agitating for. My name is Miriam Ogutu. A very good morning, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and joining us from. So before we get into the whole history and the details, let me first bring us up to date with the latest story on this issue. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on the 22nd of April and the rebel Oromo Liberation Army OLA announced that they will begin peace negotiations in Tanzania. The two sides had agreed on that. This would have been the first time Ethiopian government has formally said it will negotiate with the OLA, which has been battling the government on and off for decades. And I'll just quote what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said on the 22nd. A negotiation with Oneg Shene will start a day after tomorrow. He was speaking, this was on a Sunday, and using another name for the OLA. The OLA said the government had accepted this group's terms for peace talks. The OLA said this is a crucial and positive step towards establishing a lasting peace in the region. However, OLA objected to being referred to as Shene, saying the name misrepresented its identity and objectives. The OLA is an outlawed splinter group of the Oromo Liberation Front, a formerly banned opposition party that returned from exile after Abiy took office in 2018. Now, the OLF was in exile in Eritrea. So after Abiy Ahmed took office, they came back to Ethiopia. So that is what I'm referencing to. And the group's grievances are rooted in the alleged marginalization of the Oromo people and the neglect by the federal government. And I will get into the details of that very quickly. So the summary of these talks that took place in Tanzania. The talks were largely mediated by Norway and Kenya, and both parties were represented by a team of 6 delegates and mediators each. And the OLA armed group has been fighting Ethiopia's government since the 1970s for self-determination of Oromia. And the first round of talks between the Ethiopian federal government and rebel group, the Oromo Liberation Army, ended on Wednesday. That is the 3rd of May. That is yesterday. Today is Thursday, the 4th of May, without any major breakthrough. However, the two sides expressed commitment to continue engaging in a dialogue on a peacefully end the long-running conflict in the Oromia region. The negotiations have been going on for 9 days since Tuesday of last week in Tanzania's semi-autonomous region of Zanzibar. And I'll just quote what the advisor to Ethiopia's Prime Minister, National Security, Redwan Hussein, tweeted. While the talks have been largely constructive, unfortunately, it was not possible to reach an agreement on some issues during these rounds of talks. Both parties have acknowledged the need to continue these talks with a view to resolving the conflict permanently and peacefully. And Redwan, who was in the government's negotiating team, reaffirmed Addis Ababa's firm commitment to the peaceful resolution of the conflict in accordance with the constitution and within the framework of the fundamental principles that have guided this so far. He extended gratitude to those who facilitated and hosted the talks without mentioning them by names. The talks were largely mediated by Norway and Kenya, as I have already mentioned there, according to the rebel sources. In a separate statement later on Wednesday, OLA said the initial round of talks concluded with some progress, but no agreement was reached on key political issues. The rebel group expressed its determination to find a political solution to the conflict. The OLF OLA, there is the Oromo Liberation Front, which came back from Eritrea, and Oromo Liberation Army, which is the armed, but they broke ranks, but is the armed side of that, would like to take this opportunity to reiterate its commitment to the peaceful resolution of the conflict through an honorable political settlement. OLA spokesperson Oda Tarbi said OLA further expressed its gratitude to those who facilitated and hosted the talks. Both parties did not state on which political issues they differ to agree on, nor did they disclose agendas they discussed on. Now, the meetings were initially planned to end by the end of weekend, but was extended by a few more days. According to sources close to the matter, Kenya and Norway played a leading mediation role in the first week-long negotiations. It is not yet known where and when the next round of talks will take place. Both parties were represented by a team of 6 delegates and mediators each. The Ethiopian government's negotiating team included country's Justice Minister Gideon Timotheos and the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor Redwan Hussein, both of whom were previously negotiating with the Tigray forces. It is to be recalled that Redwan on November 4th, 2022, led the Ethiopian negotiating team that agreed on a permanent ceasefire with Tigray's People's Liberation Front, with whom the nation's government had fought for 2 years, the war that started in November 2020. OLA on its side was represented by its commander advisor, Jiregna Gudeta, a historian, Professor Mohammed Hassan, and Abdi Taha. The OLA group has been fighting Ethiopia's government since the 1970s for self-determination of Oromia, the most populous and largest region in the Horn of Africa. The rebels who fight for self-determination of the Oromo people, largest ethnic group in Ethiopia, intensified their fighting in the last 4 years in a bid to topple Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's central government. OLA was designated by Addis Ababa as a terrorist entity in May 2021. So from what we are getting from these talks that were happening in Zanzibar, Tanzania, they both, I think, there is an agreement that some progress have been made and perhaps some initial agreement has been reached upon, but none of them was willing to let us know what exactly was happening. But they both camps seem to agree on some little progress that was made, except we don't know really what they were talking about and what they were able to discuss and why a proper agreement could not be reached. Of course, both of them have acknowledged that there was some little progress that was made after that meeting that went on for about 10 days or so. Now, OLF claims that the root cause of political problems in Ethiopia is the policy of oppression. This is just one of the issues that they've been raising, or a couple of them. Is the oppression by the former imperial state of Ethiopia and refusal by the state to respect the rights of oppressed people to self-determination. So they, unlike the fight that the TPLF was having with the government of Ethiopia, OLF wants to secede, okay? Because they feel they have been marginalized and they feel that they have a right to self-determination. TPLF was not fighting for that. The Tigray's People Liberation Front was not fighting for secession, okay? Was not agitating for self-determination. So perhaps that is the difference undertone, and maybe that's why Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his government perhaps find it very easy to have talks with TPLF at that time. OLA had been fighting with the government from 1970, as you shall see very shortly. And so that is just the difference that I'd like for us to underscore there. And the current Ethiopian government recognizes the right to self-determination of all states in its constitution, but it is accused of placing limitations imposed on the exercise of that right. OLF believes, this is where they try to legitimize why they have been fighting this government. So OLF believes that there is an imperial domination that must be brought to an end in order to bring genuine peace and stability. Thus, there is currently a policy of shelving political problems which they say must cease. So it's like they're saying how the Ethiopian community is as a country. There is what do you call it, a culture of not speaking out and just sweeping issues under the rug. But OLA is saying one of the key resolutions and why it keeps agitating and fighting is that it wants there to be an open space and an open channels of communication and of solving issues, and not talking about them, but creating a space where they can engage freely on these issues. So the OLF says that it is ready to contribute towards any meaningful effort to reach at a comprehensive settlement to bring peace to all people. In the view of the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF, another issue with the OLF movement has been the movement's treatment of Oromos who don't support OLF's ideologies. This is part of the reason the EPRDF helped to form an organization called the Oromo People's Democratic Organization. OLF has stated that they do not resent Oromos for being members of the OPDO. Okay, so that is just part of the issues they have with the government. So can we just perhaps go back down memory lane and just have a bit of an understanding of where maybe some of these feelings and problems emanated from? Just a bit of history. The Oromo remained independent until the last quarter of the 19th century. They then lost their sovereignty and were conquered by Abyssinia. Oppression was harsh under the imperial rule of Haile Selassie of the Amara ethnic group. Under Haile Selassie regime, Oromo was banned from education, the use in administration. The Amara culture dominated throughout the eras of military and monarchic rule. And as I've mentioned there, Oromo is the largest ethnic group. You know, Ethiopia is ethnically diverse. It's just one of the most ethnically diverse countries in Africa, and it is the second largest populous country also in Africa after Nigeria. And Oromo is the leading ethnic group in terms of its population. Okay, followed by Amara. And so when you hear that Amara dominated the politics and being the second largest, actually the national language for Ethiopia, I think it's Amharic. It is from this ethnic group. So perhaps you can understand the problem that Oromo has been having, feeling that they are the dominant, ethnic group, and yet others seems to be having more leverage as opposed to what perhaps they suppose some kind of privileges that they should be enjoying as far as their population dominance. Anyway, I will digress from that. The Amara culture dominated throughout the eras of military and monarchic rule. Both the Haile Selassie and the Dutch government relocated numerous Amaras into southern Ethiopia, where they served in government administrations and courts, churches, and even in schools, where Oromo texts were eliminated and replaced by Amara. There has been a targeted, and I think I do have that story, something that was reported in February, where Amaras, a huge number of them were being targeted, allegedly were targeted and killed by Oromo. And there has been those targeted killings between the Oromo and the Amara, okay? And that's why you see when Amaras, I think about 3 weeks ago, they were protesting against the idea of government wanting to take their weapons away, because they feel if they gave away their weapons, that will leave them very vulnerable, and that is because they have to constantly defend themselves against other ethnic communities, and especially the Oromo, who have been targeting them in these kinds of attacks. So that is where their fear of not wanting to give their weapons to the government was coming from. But you can see these have historical ties, and a lot of it also has to do with the short-lived presence of Italy, which attempted to colonize Ethiopia, and its legacy and how it planted some ethnic division in Ethiopia, and the legacy of that lives till today. Okay. All right, it's a lot, and we can't cover all of it today. So you can see how the Oromo texts were eliminated. This is just some historical facts and some of the things that fomented this hate, this disunity between these key leading ethnic groups there in Ethiopia. And all right, so where were we? So the texts were eliminated and replaced by Amharic, which is the second largest community in Ethiopia. The Abyssinian elites perceived the Oromo identity and languages as an obstacle to the expansion of the Ethiopian national identity. Okay? And so in 1967, the regime of Haile Selassie outlawed the Mecca and Tuluma Self-Help Association and later instigated a wave of mass arrest and killings of its members and leaders. Prominent military officer and leader of the association, Colonel General Tadesu Biro, was also arrested. This reaction by the regime had been caused, so they were the leaders of these associations that were associated with the Oromo, okay? This Tuluma Self-Help Association and MEC, and I think they're very important institutions at that time within the Oromo community. So after their leaders were arrested and some of the members killed, a Colonel General Tadesu Biro was also arrested, who was the leader of one of those self-help associations. This reaction by the regime had been caused by the popularity of the organization among the Oromos and its links to the Bale Oromo resistance movement. So this Bale Oromo resistance movement, perhaps we need to understand what this means so that we can fully understand as we go. You know, as I give you this information, I also would like for us to learn a little bit. I love history, so you will excuse me just a little bit. So the Bale Revolt, okay, which these leaders were killed and were arrested for having been suspected of working with, this Bale Revolt, or the Bale Peasant Movement, was an insurgency that took place in the 1960s in the southeastern Ethiopian province of Bale among the local Oromo and Somali populations. Okay, we do have a Somali population huge in Ethiopia. The revolt targeted the feudalist system in place during the Ethiopian Empire and was rooted in ethnic and religious grievances. And this Ethiopian Empire, we know that was being held or led, was from the member of the Amharic ethnic group. Initially, acts of resistance began in 1962. And in 1963, as a defensive reaction by peasants to land expropriation, bureaucratic corruption, and exorbitant taxation imposed by the government. This is like the hallmarks of Marxist ideology, the class struggles, the proletarians, and the other ones. When these two classes especially the peasants, the proletarians, if they feel the unfairness and they feel they're being exploited and the differences in terms of class and earnings and all that, that is, and they get to do so much of the work, but the people who own the production chain get to benefit more than them, then it creates a problem. So what I'm explaining here and why this Bale revolt was even formed to fight was based on Marxist ideology that explains the problems that the class struggle creates if it's not really taken care of. You'll find that the peasants will get tired of being exploited and they will arise and form themselves and start fighting the elites. Okay, the bourgeoisies, as we call them. Okay, so however, further clashes and consequent government reprisals eventually transformed the peasants into a decentralized insurgency that will go on to wage a 6-year-long guerrilla war ending in the 1970. Support from the Somali government that had begun in 1963 was integral to the insurgency's ability to sustain combat operations. So I was just explaining a bit of that Bale revolt, that these two leaders from these two associations, were accused of joining, and so they were arrested and all that. So one of the associates member, Hussein Sora, escaped to Somalia in 1967. He and other Oromo refugees formed a rebel group called the Ethiopian National Liberation Front, of which he was named Secretary General. The ENLF soon moved to Yemen and began training members of the Oromo diaspora. The first attempt to enter the country was commanded by Jara Abba Gada, but it failed when Somali security forces tracked down the members and arrested them trying to enter Ethiopia through northern Somalia. And second attempt proved to be more successful, and the second group of rebels made camp in the Chercher Mountains. At this point, the group decided to operate under the name of Oromo instead of Ethiopia. And in 1973, the political situation of the country had changed, and the Ethiopian military had ousted the imperial regime and taken control. Leaders and members of the MTSHA who had escaped arrest had been operating secretly within the country by stirring up activism through underground newspapers such as the Kina Bekta and the Oromo Voice Against Tyranny. They organized a secret conference which was attended by Hussein Sora, Elemu Giltu, and various other Oromo leaders. It was during this conference that the Oromo Liberation Front was officially formed, and its first political program was first written out. The armed Oromo units in the Chercher Mountains were adopted as the military wing of the organization, the Oromo Liberation Army, or OLA, that we know today. The Oromo Liberation Army in the Chercher Mountains was placed under the command of Hassan Ibrahim, most commonly known as Elimu Giltu. And of course, in 1974, the OLA increased its activities in the mountains and caused much alarm amongst the administrators of the region, especially when they killed the notorious landowner Mulatu Tegen. The military regime of Ethiopia then sent General Getachew Shibeshi to destroy the insurrection, and in September 16th, 1974, the first Oromo Liberation Army was obliterated by mortar fire in the Battle of Tiro, which they lost both Ahmad Taki and Elemo Giltu. Only 3 OLA soldiers survived. Okay, so you can see, and then the history continues. And in 1976, the OLA had taken up a stronghold in the Chercher Mountains, and this was used as an opportunity to reorganize the front. A 2-day secret conference was organized among the leaders, and all that they continued up to the 1980s. So it's a lot going in there, so I'll not get too much into all of the details of that, but I needed for us to understand just the short history of why we are here and what is the problem and what is happening in Ethiopia, and the background. So you can see what is happening in Ethiopia today is a history of so many factors that goes back to the 1970s, as I have explained there, of which some of them are founded and maybe some not, but all the same, these are issues that have to be, ironed out. And as I said, the Oromo remained quite independent until the last quarter of the 19th century. And in 1967, the regime of Haile Selassie, of course, outlawed them and all that. So we see how they morphed, and the reason why they came together and they thought it was important for them to form these groups to protect themselves is the running theme with all these countries in Africa that you find have some level of stability or a long running insurgency or a conflict, and much of it has to do with the issue of marginalization, and that is what they felt at that time. That is what they felt, and that is why they felt it was important for them to start agitating, because they felt the people who were in power at that time were really marginalizing them, and them being the largest community in Ethiopia, they felt it is absurd and it is unacceptable. And so the Oromo Liberation Army, the then military wing of the Oromo Liberation Front, was formed in 1974, evolving from the Bale Revolt that I have explained. And in August 2018, this is just now in the recent history, a peace agreement was signed between the Ethiopian government and the OLF declaring a ceasefire. This is after the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed first came to power. And at this point, the OLF, we have the OLF and the OLA. The OLA is the armed wing of that. So the OLF is the one that was in Eritrea at that time. it was operating from Eritrea. So after this peace agreement, they came back to Ethiopia. And I think this is just one of the other things that happened in the early days of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's leadership that earned him that Laureate Peace Prize, remember, that he had. Okay, so the declaring a ceasefire, the OLF's disarming of weapons, the continuation of OLF's activities by peaceful means, and the creation of a joint committee for implementing the agreement. Some fractions of the OLF's armed wing, the Oromo Liberation Army, refused to disarm. So part of the agreement they had with the government in 2018 was for disarmament and for the continuation of OLF activities, but by peaceful means. But there are a section of that, the armed wing, that did not agree with especially the disarmament aspect of this peace agreement. The Oromo Liberation Army, they refused to disarm out of skepticism of the government's intent to abide by the agreement, thereby disassociating itself from the OLF and leading to the Oromo Liberation Army. Okay, so they said what the OLF, the Oromo Liberation Front, this agreement they made, we're not in agreement with it, because us giving up our arms to the government, and we seem to be having trust issues. We don't know, maybe they were betrayed before by the preceding government, so they did not, and Abiy Ahmed was just new, he was just a new prime minister at that time, so they were not sure if giving up their arms was a good idea, and they seem to have had trust issues, which they still have today. And that, I think, as with the short history they have explained there, we can see why perhaps they were skeptical in giving up their arms, and they were also skeptical of the government's intent to abide by the agreement, thereby, disassociating themselves with that deal the government had, the Ethiopian government, with the OLF. Okay, and so the Oromo Liberation Army, separate from the OLF in its current form, many of the OLF members that disarmed ended up flocking back to the OLA after failing to see components of the peace deal honored. So this part of this peace deal, the government of Ethiopia did not respect this peace deal. So even for those who willingly gave up their arms and were ready to really be part of the implementation of that agreement that they had signed with the government in 2018, after waiting for a while and seeing that nothing was moving, and perhaps the government was not showing a goodwill in terms of implementing this deal, they decided to go back and rejoin the OLAC problems. Okay. And so in January 2023, the OLA released a political manifesto in which they laid out their aims. Okay, so I'll just go through them very quickly. They're just 3 points, but it starts with a preamble. We, the Oromo Liberation Army, OLA, fight for the Oromo people's right to self-determination. So now, it's not that you have to meet that part of the deal and this is what we need, and we need for you to address the issues of marginalization and historical and structural marginalization of the people of Oromia. But outside of that, now we, the people of Oromo, fight for the Oromo people's right to self-determination. So essentially, while they were making this proclamation in January 2023, they were saying now we want to secede and we want to form our own country. And then you look at the Ethiopian map and Ethiopia as it is, and when you see where the Oromo region is placed, then it will have to divide Ethiopia in the middle, because it's right in the middle of Ethiopia. It is just right in the middle of other regions in Ethiopia. So that would perhaps mean that we'll have, I don't know, we will have Ethiopia North, and then Ethiopia South, and then Ethiopia North, and then in the middle we have the Oromia region. You can see how that map looks like. So if now Oromia decides they want to have their own country and secede, you tell me how that will look like, because they cut right through in the middle of Ethiopia. So they said they have a right to self-determination. We fight for the freedom of the Oromo people from political exclusion, economic exploitation, and social cultural marginalization. So A, we fight to realize the Oromo people's right to freely determine their political status, for the right of our people to determine their political destiny, and to establish a responsive government through freely elected representatives. And point number B, according to this manifesto, political manifesto, they released in January 2023, we fight to secure the Oromo people's economic sovereignty, to stop the exploitation of our people's natural and human resources, to develop these resources for the benefit of all. And then point number C, we fight to realize the social cultural rights of our people. We demand respect for and full recognition of the Oromo language, culture, and history. At the beginning, when I was taking you through the history and how allegedly in the early days of Ethiopia, and how there was a deliberate attempt to replace even texts and other materials that were in the Oromo language with the Amharic language, which is the national language of Ethiopia. So you can see these are grievances that takes us back to where I was giving us a short history of to some of the problems that perhaps created the grounds for the divisiveness that we see in Ethiopia today. So if this was the attitude and this was the declaration they made in January, and perhaps maybe this is the attitude they went with in these negotiations in Zanzibar, then I'm not surprised that these negotiations could not find a resolution. But they've not told us what they talked about. Neither side has came out and given us details of what that mediation process was like. And so I don't want to sit here and make assumptions because I think this is way too important. But I'm just based on what they've been agitating for, I'm just trying to perhaps see, could this have been one of the reasons why they could not have reached an agreement? But I think I'll leave that until we are able to get details of that meeting and details of that mediation process. And they've said that they will continue. A date has not been given. So I guess that did not go very well. Okay, that did not go very well. So that is what I needed for us to know this afternoon and to see what really is happening there in Ethiopia. But I think a resolution should be found. A resolution should be found, and I think very soon. We don't want to see another situation like what happened between the Ethiopian government and that of the disagreement, not the conflict, a full-blown conflict between the Ethiopian government and the TPLF. And the country is still reeling from that. And we thought that was serious. But when you look at this OLA and its problems that it's been having with the government and how far it dates, you can see this here. This mediation requires, one, a lot of time. Two, there has to be some level of commitment from both sides. And by that I mean to listen to each other, and also for these talks to be successful. I don't know if Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed would be in agreement, if at all. Some of these declarations that OLA made in January, one of them is they have a right to self-determination, that is to secede from their own country and charter their own political future. I don't know if that is one of the things that found itself on the table. I'm not sure. As I said, we don't know the details of that mediation and what really happened, okay? But I'm just assuming, because these are declarations they made earlier in the year, so I'm just assuming these are the issues they came with to the table. But I don't see how the Prime Minister and the Ethiopian government will be in agreement to allow for that to happen. The difference, like I said, between the OLA and what they're agitating for and the TPLF, the OLA being the largest ethnicity in Ethiopia. The TPLF had been in power for 27 years, so the agitation is different. Them, they felt left out because they're used to being in power. So they felt left out when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power, and from this, what is it? The name of the party? Prosperity Party, that brought all the smaller parties together, and the TPLF refused to join, and it felt neglected, and I think it felt very entitled because it had been in power for 27 years. So their agitation is different. They had been part of the leadership of Ethiopia. They had a problem that perhaps they're not enjoying the same privileges anymore. Their regime caused, allegedly, a lot of division in Ethiopia in how they were ruling and how they were handling certain issues, and how out of that really fueled this ethnic balkanization and problems that we see in Ethiopia that had been planted years earlier, but through their leadership, I think also agitated and reinforced the need for these other communities to want to form a very strong identity in terms of protecting themselves and who they are, because they felt they were not being heard, and they felt one community was dominating the politics of that country. But the TPLF is just fighting to be heard, and perhaps to be allowed some of these positions and its voice to be active in the government. But the OLA is fighting to secede because they feel there has been structural and systematic marginalization of this largest community in Ethiopia. So that is the different undertones that we have in this. And don't forget the Amara. And that is a conversation we will have another day, because they're also fighting almost similar to what OLA is fighting for. Similar but a bit different. And that is a conversation we will have another time. So that is what I wanted to bring to our attention today, that the talks that were happening in Zanzibar, those talks failed to materialize, and there's nothing much to report about. No much conversation has been given, and but the government has reiterated its commitment to the peaceful resolution of the conflict in accordance with the constitution, and that is according to the representative that was representing the government of Ethiopia in those talks, and those talks were being mediated by Norway and Kenya, and the rebels and the government both had representatives, about six, and the OLA also, reiterated its commitment to the peaceful resolution of the conflict through a honorable political settlement. So this political settlement is what I need to know. What were the details, and what were some of the demands they made that perhaps are not auguring well with the government? Or what are some of the, concessions that the government was seeking from the OLF that that side could not really give. So I think we're left here wondering, but I'm just hoping the details of that process will come out, and hopefully there will be a continuation of what already had started. Like I said, as long as you keep talking, really, nothing can go off. As long as the communication channels are open, chances of finding a resolution is always there. But if you all are having these hard-lined positions, then you're not going to have any headways as far as this mediation process is concerned. But this is something that I shall be following for us, and as soon as there's any new development, I'll be happy to report it to you. I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day. My name is Miriam Ugotu. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.